Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're tackling something really exciting today, and that's your leap into international education. Specifically, what to consider if, studying in the U.S. is something you've been thinking about.
Yeah, it's a journey with so many possibilities, but it it can feel like a lot to navigate. There are tons of things to think about for sure.
You're telling me. So instead of hitting you with all that generic advice, we're diving deep with insights from someone who's been there, done that Saheed Adepoju.
Oh, I like him.
Yeah, he's got this awesome YouTube video taking the first leap, motivations and aspiration, and he really breaks down his experience with studying in the U.S. firsthand.
What I appreciate is, he doesn't just give you a checklist. He
Yeah.
actually explains the why behind his recommendations. And that kind of thinking when you're making big decisions like this, that's gold.
100%. So let's jump right in. Now, you might be thinking, why the U.S.? It's a fair question. And Adepoju even mentions checking out other countries like Canada, the UK.
Right. He'd already lived in the UK, actually, and found breaking into the tech industry there a bit tougher than he expected. Canada was on his list, but for him, the energy of the US tech scene, plus he had a friend who was already killing it as a software engineer here, that tipped the scales.
See, that's huge. Talking to people who've actually walked the path you're considering. That's so valuable. Their experiences bring a whole new level of insight.
Totally. Hearing those firsthand accounts can really change your perspective. And you know what else Adepoju's big on? School rankings. He's like, don't put all your faith in them. He
Yeah.
compares them to those flashy airline ads we all know. So tempting, but they don't always tell the whole story.
So true. Just like those ads, rankings don't tell the whole story. And with over 3,982, that's not a typo, folks. Post-secondary institutions in the U.S., you need a system. It's about finding the right fit, not just chasing the highest rank.
Exactly. And that's where Adepoju's first leap framework comes in. He breaks down the decision-making process into these manageable, practical steps.
And at the tippy top of that list, affordability. He even calls it his #1 rule, which makes total sense, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how amazing a university is if you're drowning in financial stress the whole time.
Right. He actually recommends this cool tool, the EPI Family Budget Calculator. You can find it on their website, epi.org. It helps you estimate the cost of living in different cities so you can make informed choices.
It's eye-opening. He compares Houston, Texas to New York City, and the numbers are wild. In Houston, you might snag housing for around $893,000 a month. But in New York City, you're looking at closer to $1,760. That's more than double.
Wow.
I know.
Which is why Adepoju challenges this idea that a big city education is automatically the best. Sometimes going with a location with a lower cost of living actually frees you up to pursue other opportunities.
It's about finding that balance, the quality of your education, but also the quality of your life while you're actually there. Speaking of which, Adepoju is a huge advocate for taking advantage of funding opportunities.
For sure. He emphasizes seeking out universities that offer teaching or research assistantships.
Which isn't just about the financial help, although that's huge EE, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's the potential career benefits they bring, that hands-on experience.
Absolutely. Being a teaching assistant, you get experience in your field. That's huge when you're job hunting later on. Research assistantships, you often get to contribute to cutting-edge research. He even shares how his assistantship salary aligned perfectly with his living expenses, which made a world of difference.
That's what I'm talking about. This isn't just about getting accepted to any program. It's about setting yourself up for success during A&D after your studies. Speaking of which, Adepoju has some pretty interesting advice about digging deeper into the research happening at potential schools, right?
Totally. He's all about looking beyond those general program descriptions and seeing what the professors are up to. What are they passionate about? What projects are they working on?
It's about finding those mentors in research areas that really light your fire. Now, he also mentions something called NSF funding. What's the deal with that?
So the National Science Foundation, or NSF, is this major government agency in the U.S. that funds research across all these different fields. Science, engineering, you name it. When a professor or a project gets NSF funding, you know it's top-notch research.
It's like a gold star for research.
Yeah.
So even if you're not at a top-ranked university overall, you could still be in the middle of groundbreaking work.
Exactly, and learning from true experts in the field.
So it really is about looking deeper, isn't it? Okay, we've got affordability, funding, research alignment. What else should be on our radar?
Accreditation. Adepoju's really big on it, especially in fields like engineering. He specifically talks about ABET accreditation, the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology.
Okay, so what does ABET accreditation tell us?
It's basically your guarantee that the program you're considering meets these high standards set by professionals in the field. It makes sure the curriculum is up to date, the faculty are qualified, the facilities are good, all that.
So no matter what school you choose, as long as it's got that ABET accreditation, you can be confident you're getting a solid education.
That's it. Adepoju points out that those same standards apply across all universities, which levels the playing field in a way.
That's good to know. Now here's where Adepoju throws a bit of a curveball, he suggests, thinking about a generic degree over a super specialized one.
It does seem counterintuitive, right?
He does.
But his reasoning makes sense. He argues that a broader degree, like, say, a master's in computer science, gives you more flexibility down the line compared to something more specialized, like a master's in data analytics, for example.
So it's like you're future-proofing your career, especially in a world where things are changing so quickly.
Exactly.
He also touches on how this approach can be good for, like, the visa stuff too, right?
Yes. He talks about the OPT, H-1B, green card process, all those terms you'll probably come across if you're aiming for a career in the U.S. And he says a broader degree can sometimes make that process a bit smoother because the requirements often line up better with those bigger fields.
It's like having a master key that opens more doors.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the GRE. You know, that standardized test that can feel like this big looming thing. What's Adepoju's take on that?
His advice is pretty clear-cut. Take it. Even though some schools are starting to phase it out, he still thinks it's worth it.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
A couple of reasons. First, even if some universities are moving on, the GRE still holds weight in a lot of places. It's a standardized way to look at your skills, which can be really helpful when you're comparing students from all over the place, you know? And second, those GRE scores, they're good for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
So you've got that score in your back pocket for future applications if you need it.
Smart. Sounds like Adepoju is all about the strategic planning.
Absolutely. And speaking of strategy, he has some really interesting advice when it comes to actually choosing which universities to apply to. Now, you might be thinking, just aim for the most prestigious ones, right? But Adepoju encourages a slightly different approach.
I have a feeling this is where his first leap framework really comes into play. Tell us more.
He suggests thinking beyond those big-name schools and considering a mix of institutions, including some that might be lesser known but still have really strong programs in your field. It's about finding those hidden gems. Remember, rankings don't tell the whole story. Exactly. Affordability, the research going on there, the funding. You're widening your options by picking places in different states, to find those perfect matches.
And it's a good way to show visa officers that you've actually done your homework, that this isn't just like a random decision, right?
Exactly. It all feeds into that idea of you being a serious student, someone who's invested in getting the most out of this opportunity.
Yeah.
You're deliberate.
I like that. Owning your journey right from the get-go, right from that application.
You got it. Shows initiative. Speaking of initiative, Adepoju's got some really cool advice about choosing your degree program, especially within STEM fields, which I know is something you're thinking about.
Yeah, this is where his perspective gets interesting. He suggests not specializing too early.
Might sound weird at first, right? But his logic totally makes sense. He says that a broader degree, like a master's in computer science, just as an example, gives you more flexibility later on down the line compared to something super niche, like a master's in data analytics. Think of it like building a strong foundation.
It's like he's saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket, especially in a job market that never stops changing. He actually mentions how this can be helpful for the visa process too, right?
For sure. The H-1B visa, which a lot of international students who want to work in the U.S. after they graduate apply for, that's a perfect example. It's often tied to your specific area of study. So let's say you go super niche in data science early on, but then things change. The job market shifts, or maybe even your interests change, and you want to move to a different area within tech, broadly speaking.
It could really complicate your plans when it comes to the visa stuff.
Exactly. A broader degree can be like a safety net, making it easier to adapt, explore different career paths without hitting a wall.
More options. Never a bad thing. Speaking of options, what does Adepoju say about the GRE? Some schools are starting to move away from it, but is it still important?
Adepoju's take is pretty straightforward. Take the GRE, even if some universities are starting to phase it out.
Oh, interesting. Why does he still recommend it?
He has a couple of reasons. Number one, even if some schools are moving on, the GRE still carries weight in a lot of places. It's a standardized way to look at your abilities, which is really useful when comparing students from different backgrounds, different parts of the world. And the second thing, GRE scores are good for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
So even if you're not applying to a school that requires it right now, you've got that score if you need it later.
Smart. Talk about thinking ahead. He's all about strategy.
Absolutely. And since we're talking strategy, he has some pretty interesting advice when it comes to actually choosing what universities to apply to. It's tempting to just aim for the big names, right? The ones everyone's heard of.
Makes sense.
But Adepoju encourages a bit of a different approach.
Oh, I bet this is where that first leap framework comes in again. What's his take?
He says, think beyond the big names. Consider a mix of different institutions, including some that are, maybe a bit less well known, but still have excellent programs in your area of interest. Think of it like finding those hidden gems.
It's like those amazing hole-in-the-wall restaurants, right? Might not look like much from the outside, but the food is incredible.
Exactly. That ranking doesn't always tell you about the quality of specific programs within the university or the opportunities you'll have in your particular area. You open yourself up to way more by diversifying your application list.
Makes sense.
And this ties back to the funding opportunities and research projects we talked about before.
It's all about going beyond the surface, really getting into what each university is truly about.
You got it. And that's especially true for those research opportunities. Adepoju says to really look beyond those general program descriptions, go deep into what the professors are working on. Look at their publications, what they're currently researching, their areas of expertise.
It's about more than just a program that looks good on paper, then. It's about finding mentors in research areas that genuinely excite you.
You nailed it. Remember, those relationships with your professors, those can be super valuable during your studies and for your future career. He emphasizes how important it is to find mentors who aren't just experts in their field, but who are invested in you, in your success.
Like finding your own personal academic cheer squad. That's awesome. What about the application itself? Any tips from Adepoju on how to stand out from everyone else?
This is where that strategic thinking is key. He wants people to treat their applications as a chance to tell their own story, to show their passions and what makes them a great fit for that specific program, that university.
More than just checking boxes. And you got to let your personality come through.
Yes. Showcase your authentic self, your genuine excitement for this opportunity to study in the U.S. Adepoju talks about writing personal statements that are compelling, that go beyond just listing what you've achieved. Share your story, what you want to do, what motivates you.
And those recommendation letters, make sure you choose people who really know you and your work, who can talk about your abilities and your potential. Now, I want to switch gears for a sec and talk about life outside of classes. What's the U.S. experience really like? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages Adepoju talks about?
He points out some major advantages, especially for people in STEM fields. The U.S. has this really dynamic work culture, especially in tech, where hands-on experience is super important. Internships, research projects, even part-time jobs in your field, they can all give you a head start on your career after you graduate.
It's like getting a head start on your career while you're still studying.
Totally. And you can't beat the networking and relationships you build while you're actually working in your field. He also talks about experiencing such a diverse and multicultural environment, which can really broaden your perspective, make you think differently.
It's like a huge melting pot of ideas and experiences.
Exactly. But he's also honest about the fact that adjusting to life in the U.S. isn't always sunshine and roses.
There are bound to be challenges with something like this.
Of course. Moving to a new country, especially one as big and varied as the U.S., takes time to adjust to. Homesickness is real. Cultural differences. Even just figuring out public transportation or a new city can feel overwhelming at times.
Having a good support system in place is essential. And actually, this is something Adepoju talks about, right? Finding your community.
Huge. Connecting with other international students can make a world of difference. Not only can they understand what you're going through, but they can also introduce you to new ways of seeing things, help you navigate those cultural differences.
It's about building your home away from home.
Exactly.
And it's worth remembering, universities often have resources specifically designed to help international students, like orientation programs, cultural events, even counseling.
Those resources can be so helpful. Don't be afraid to use them. Ask for help when you need it. Okay, so as we're wrapping up this deep dive into Adepoju's insights, I want to touch on one last thing that's so important when planning your international education journey: finances.
Yeah, this is something he emphasizes throughout being financially prepared. And it goes way beyond just tuition, right?
Yeah, totally. This is about the big picture. Think about living expenses, health insurance, books, travel costs. All those little things add up so fast. He recommends making a realistic budget that includes all of it.
It's just like planning a trip, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't get on that plane without knowing how much you could spend on accommodation, food, activities. The same goes for your education journey. So, to our listeners, take Adepoju's advice to heart here. Do your research. Look at all those funding options, scholarships, assistantships, and have a solid financial plan. It'll save you so much stress.
You're telling me. And remember, your financial situation might change over time, so stay informed about any changes with visas, university policies, anything that could affect your financial aid or your ability to work.
Be proactive. Stay one step ahead.
Right. Got to stay on top of it. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive into making your international education dreams a reality, let's talk about the overall U.S. experience a bit more.
Okay.
Adepoju talks about some great advantages, like, the chance to get some real-world work experience, learn from people with all sorts of different backgrounds and perspectives.
For sure. And for you, especially thinking about your interest in, mentioned listeners' field of study from listener persona, that hands-on experience is going to be huge E.
Yeah.
The U.S. work culture, especially in tech, it really values that.
Oh, absolutely.
Plus, imagine being exposed to so many different ways of thinking, like a crash course in global collaboration almost.
It really is. He also mentions having access to top-notch facilities, which can be a game changer, especially in research-heavy fields. Like, say if you were going into mention a relevant field from the listener's persona.
Wow, yeah.
Okay.
Working with all the latest equipment, amazing resources, it'd be like stepping into the future of your field.
Exactly.
But I appreciate that Adepoju keeps it real too. He talks about some of the potential downsides like homesickness or the challenges of adjusting to a culture that's, pretty individualistic.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the excitement of these new opportunities, but being prepared for those challenges, being far away from family, maybe for the first time, navigating a new culture, that's all part of the journey.
It is. It's about being prepared mentally and emotionally as much as anything, which is what this whole deep dive is about. And what would be amazing? Hearing from other international students directly, students who've gone through this whole experience.
Oh, absolutely. Those stories, the highs, the lows, all those little unexpected things you learn along the way, there's so much wisdom there that you won't find in a guidebook.
Exactly. So to our listeners, stay tuned, because in some upcoming episodes, we're going to do just that. We'll be talking to international students, hearing about their experiences with education, with life in the U.S. in general, getting those first-hand perspectives to help you prepare for your own journey. But for now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something Adepoju emphasizes, which is planning. Being thoughtful about your finances and your overall timeline.
He's a big believer in taking your time. Don't rush the process. Take the time to really think about your goals, what you want to achieve, what resources you have, and what path really makes the most sense for you.
It's like planning an amazing trip. You wouldn't just hop on a plane without thinking about how much you can spend on things like flights and accommodation and all those awesome restaurants you want to try.
Right.
Same goes for your international education. So here's a question for you to consider. As you're planning your own first leap, what are some things you'd want to have planned out in advance to make this journey a success? What are some steps you can take, even starting today, to make this dream a reality?
Keep exploring your options. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and most importantly, keep that momentum going. This is such an exciting time, and with some planning and preparation, you'll be well on your way to achieving those international education goals.
Love it. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us, everyone.